It's Thursday, the 16th of September. Good morning. You're listening to the London International Shipping Week Daily Podcast. I'm Richard Mead, editor of Lloyd's List. Coming up on today's podcast, I talk to the UK Chamber of Shipping's outgoing Chief Executive, Bob Sanguinetti, about his hopes for the future of post-Brexit British maritime. Ince's global senior partner, Julian Clark, explains why the future of shipping has very little to do with shipping. And Philip Roche, global co-head of shipping at Norton Rose Fulbright, talks about why the social aspect of London Shipping Week is so essential and why everybody's calendars are suddenly so full. But first, we're looking at shipping's image problem. What image problem, I hear you cry? Here we sit in the middle of London Shipping Week pronouncing the vital works that shipping has offered global trade. Here we are debating the final nuances of our fully decarbonised and digitalised future. The government loves us. We're an essential component of the economy. So why is the editor of Lloyd's List determined to paint us in a negative light and complain about our image? Well, I'll tell you. The shipping industry complains it is an invisible and unrecognised key component of global trade. Yet, when it mattered and something significant happened to focus the eyes of the world on shipping, where were the executives of the companies involved in the ever-given container ship grounding of the Suez Canal? They were hiding behind press releases and crisis managers, that's where. And why is this a problem? Well, you can find out later today when I join Blue Communications in their debate on shipping's image problem. I'm going to be joined by the IMO Legal Affairs Director and Power Broker, Fred Kenny, Wister's President and CEO of Tota Theo Maritime, Despina Theodosiou, BV's Head of Comms, Nick Brown, and Blue's very own founder and brand guru-in-chief, Alistair Pettigrew. Out of all of the debates this week, this was the one that got me excited enough to speak out on a panel rather than being the one asking the questions. So I thought we should start today's podcast by having a quick chat with Alistair himself about why shipping's image matters. Welcome to the podcast, Alistair Pettigrew, co-founder of Blue, the PR and communications company. You are hosting this afternoon an event that I'm slightly biased because I'm involved in. I'm on the panel. And it's one of those rare occasions where I'm not going to be asking the questions, I'm going to be answering them. So the tables are being turned. And the topic is reframing shipping's tired conversation. Give us a quick helicopter pitch, if you like, as to what it is you are going to be putting me on the spot on later.
Hi, Richard. Thanks very much. I think it's probably worth just explaining the title very quickly, which is, I guess, arguably slightly antagonistic. And it's really just based on absolutely no science whatsoever, but more in a sort of anecdotal straw poll I took around the time of the documentary Black Trail coming out, which pointed a lot of accusatory fingers at shipping, particularly around its climate record and emissions. And I asked a few of my friends what they thought of shipping. And interestingly, it was largely negative. It was a dirty industry. I tried to ask what they meant by that, and I think they found it quite hard to explain. And I appreciate it wasn't very scientific, but it did get me thinking, as many of us have discussed and debated over the years, that shipping doesn't do a good job of communicating. So we thought we'd ask the question with the panel discussion.
And it's going to be an interesting one because I think certainly you and I have had this discussion on and off over many years, and it's a conversation that has been prevalent in the industry as long as I've been writing about it, last 20 odd years or so. But I think the danger is we have, to some extent, written it off as an indulgent, self-reflecting debate, session of navel gazing around sea blindness. It's been something that we have talked about, but there has been no real consequences. Whereas I think now you're looking at the tangible consequences of this debate. You're looking at lack of traction at government level when it comes to dealing with the crew crisis. You're looking at the inability of the industry to actually negotiate a consensus position when it comes to big international issues like decarbonisation. The industry lacks power as a result of its lack of visibility. It's a real problem.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it lacks power partly because it doesn't have one voice. If I was to characterize shipping's response to the outside media in particular, if we take that one example, and no disrespect to you and some fantastic journalists within maritime, but ultimately your paymasters are the industry themselves. So I think the outside media can take a slightly more sinister approach, if you like. And again, the Black Trail documentary was a good example of that. And shipping's response, if I was to characterize it, is both fragmented, because there is no one unified voice like, say, aviation, which, if you look at aviation, IATA tend to be the spokesperson for aviation, more or less. And so it's fragmented in one sense. And then, as the documentary really reflected, it's often incredibly defensive. And, in terms of what we do, in terms of building brand and reputation and being proactive for a number of our clients, for all our clients, in terms of how we communicate, those are the first two rules to ensure you employ. Don't be defensive, and have a unified, core, cohesive message to say. So I think that's the challenge. Yeah.
I think it is a challenge, and I think it's one that we all need to be focused on much more than we are. You say that the trade press, Lloyd's List, and others are part of the industry, and I think that's true. We are unapologetically part of shipping. That's very much our role. We're there to, yes, have the good sort of objective standards of journalism, speaking truth to power, but we are very much there to provide information that helps people do business better. That's our role. When it comes to being a spokes force for the industry, which is to some extent what we have become, in some respects. In the event, in the wake of the Ever Given, a big international story, we saw the majority of the players involved in that incident hiding behind pre-arranged statements, and there was nobody in front of the cameras talking about that. So it was left to the likes of us to be in front of the cameras and talking about shipping. But that is, to some extent, a bit ridiculous. The fact that we should be the ones being quoted is, I think there is a real problem there when the industry is not able or prepared to stand up and say, this is the reality of how global supply chains work. This is, when you press a button and order something from Amazon, this is what happens. Here is the reality of why shipping is responsible for turning the wheels of globalized trade. And I thought there was a real opportunity missed by the industry to tell a good story, an important story, but it was written off by everybody as being a negative story. And it was back to the old oily bird syndrome, where shipping doesn't become a news story unless there's, a pollution incident. We should be getting out there in front of this and talking up the essential nature of what this industry does.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone was just landed from Mars, Richard, they would assume you were the spokesperson for the shipping industry, I think, based on the Ever Given in this instant. And, as a former journalist myself, as you rightly say, I mean, as well as you did, and as brilliantly, I think, as you surmised the issues and challenges around the Ever Given, you don't represent the industry. You're an observer, if anything. And so there's no homogenous voice, for sure. And I agree with you completely. I think the Ever Given was a huge missed opportunity. The actual real story should have been, isn't this incredible that an incident like this is so rare? And actually, with 50, 60, 70,000 ships circumnavigating the world constantly, it's incredible that this industry is only reporting incidents like this on very rare occasions. And it was also, an opportunity to be proactive, to underpin that limelight, if you like, with all the great things that are going on in this industry. And I think if there's one sort of piece that we see from our or we could perhaps suggest from our day-to-day jobs in terms of the PR, communications, marketing world, it would be to get on the front foot. There's a whole lot of good stuff going on in shipping, as you report every day, and it feels like there's genuinely quite a pivotal moment in terms of an explosion in a very good way around decarbonisation and digitalisation. And I'm not sure shipping is doing a great job of communicating that beyond its own walls.
We know that the industry has, a problem with a persistently opaque slightly dubious end of subterfuge shipping. And to be honest, we're not really tackling that as an issue in this debate. That will be a persistent problem. What we're talking about is the vast majority of the shipping industry that is trying to do its best when it comes to these things. I just don't think it's being done in a way that is particularly positive. And as you said, it is a fragmented industry. But then I would also argue that aviation to a certain degree, but certainly energy and various other industries that do a much better job of presenting themselves internationally are also fragmented. So I think there is a discussion there, but we will come to that later on today. It promises to be an interesting debate. If you're listening to this on Thursday morning when we put this out there, you still have time to sign up and come along. It will be hosted at 240 Blackfriars, the old Lloyd's List offices, for those of you who have been there before. It promises to be a great event, actually. So I would urge anybody who is yet to make up their mind what they're doing this afternoon to come along. And there will be drinks and refreshments afterwards. But for now, Alistair, thank you for joining the London International Shipping Week podcast, and I hope you enjoy the rest of London Shipping Week.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'll see you later.
A quick glance at the London International Shipping Week schedule will tell you pretty much everything you need to know about the state of the industry and the major challenges facing it. Decarbonisation dominates the agenda, and the theme of navigating external challenges and macro events comes up again and again in the events London is hosting this year. Far more so than any previous London Shipping Week, this year's event is about shipping understanding its place in the global economy and why the future prospects of maritime business lies in understanding forces that we individually have very little agency in being able to control.
Welcome to the podcast, Julian Clark, Global Senior Partner at INTS. We are talking, towards the end of what I'm hoping has been an insightful London Shipping Week. It's an interesting one this year for Shipping Week because not only does it come as most of us are getting back to some semblance of normality after 18 months of the pandemic, but we're also talking amidst some big tectonic shifts in the industry. So this is really an important week as far as the industry is concerned. It's that opportunity to get back face to face and start talking about the big issues. How do you see, the week shaping up and the discussions? Have you got a sort of sense of what the big topics are yet, do you think?
I think so, Richard. I mean, the word that comes to mind is seismic in every sense of that. Both the fact that this is going to be the first chance for the international maritime community to get together post-COVID, which is a big enough thing anyway. We've all been in literal lockdown and mental and physical lockdown, and just to be a bit freed and get out and do what we do. We're a very personable business, so to actually see people and react with people is huge. But also for me, the challenges that we're now facing as an industry, we've always, from the early days of sail, we've faced challenges, but I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before. And my reason for that is in the short period where you think of maritime history that I've spent my life in this job, 34 odd years, there have always been challenges, but those challenges have been very shipping centric. So whether or not it's where we see these repeats of incidents. When I started life, it was every other case seemed to be a fish meal fire, and then we went through the coal fires out of Africa, South Africa and Maputo, and then we went into the calcium hypochlorite container explosion. There's always been these raft, and then there was the tragic deaths through entry into enclosed spaces and hatch cover integrity, but it's all very shipping centric. What we now see, I think, for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, is the effect of geopolitical pressures outside shipping impacting on shipping. Take cyber. Maersk hit by NotPetya, nothing to do with shipping. Geopolitical attack between Russia and Ukraine, but Maersk get suddenly caught up in that. Trump and the administration weaponizing sanctions, and again, that's a geopolitical, political issue, and suddenly you get an Italian ship owner, PB tankers, almost destroyed overnight. And as an industry, I don't think we've ever had to deal with these kind of challenges. And then environmental social governance, and the fact that we're going to have to look at how we are going to fuel our ships for the future. And we will be a different industry in 3, 5, 10 years' time from the ones that all of us grew up in. So, and I think LISW is the opportunity for the community to get together and really start addressing some of those challenges.
I think it's interesting you say that, because I think the last time we had this gathering, people were talking about the international aspect of London International Shipping Week. I think this time, we're through Brexit. We're through, we hope, the worst of the pandemic, and people are now focusing on what happens next. But as you say, almost all of the agenda is taken up with big exogenous events, and the issues that are driving shipping are no longer pure supply and demand. That would have been the topic a few years ago. We're now talking about how the industry integrates itself into a globalized supply chain. Be that from the perspective of international politics, or even down to the nitty gritty of while we're talking about alternative fuels, how shipping is then competing with other industries for those alternative fuels. And I think more and more this is a question of us looking internationally and looking outwards as an industry and trying to work out how to deal with that. I wonder, though, whether events like London Shipping Week need to start reflecting that a little bit more and start bringing in some external voices as well as the shipping industry voices.
I think that's certainly what will be on the agenda this time round, and in 2 years' time, I think we'll see a very different LISW. There's a lot when I do a lot of my work on cyber risk and terrorism. What I hear from a lot of the forums I sit on, which are very intergovernmental, is we need a closer cooperation between public and private sector in order to deal with these issues. We've seen only, this week, major organizations like IKEA suddenly moving into they're going to buy their own containers. They're going to start looking at their own logistics operations. That's a game changer. Suddenly all these industries that have previously been accustomed to shipping, actually embedding themselves centrally within shipping. Bulk carriers starting to move containers around the world. It's just, if somebody had said some of these things to us 2 years ago and said, look, through the looking glass, in 2 years' time, forget about Brexit, do you think we'll be looking at all these kind of issues? We'd have gone, no, come on. And yet here we are.
Exactly. Well, but equally, I think if you had said, a few years back that the law firms would be taking on much more of a consultancy role as we start to deal with this sort of thing as an industry, then you would have given us a funny look. But that's where we find ourselves. Both class and law are now not just in their sort of technical and legal wheelhouses. They are very much the consultants of the industry. And I guess a week like this is really the opportunity to try and get those messages across and bring in the wider conversations to your client base.
Absolutely right, Richard. Survey of the 100 top general counsels across the globe asked what did they want from their legal service providers. Majority response, not legal advice. Remarkably, that we've got that. We've got that in spades. We're qualified lawyers ourselves. We've got departments. We've got Google. We don't need that. We don't want reactive advice anymore. We want proactive problem solving. We want gap analysis. And that's going to change the whole sphere of law, which I'm very excited about. Because also when you look at generationally, people like myself, when I came into law, what I saw as what I would want from a career is very, very different from what Gen Z want from a career. And I'm excited because I think what they want is exactly what the industry is now calling for.
Excellent. Well, there will be some interesting discussions, no doubt, not least at the INTS events. For anybody who has not yet signed up to them, I recommend you all to check out the London International Shipping Week schedule and make yourself available. But for now, Julian Clark from INTS, thank you very much for joining the London Shipping Week podcast.
Thanks very much, Richard.
Next up, Bob Sanguinetti is the Chief Executive of the UK Chamber, but only for a few more days. His 3-year tenure at the helm of British shipping has seen him have to deal with everything from international security incidents to the vexed questions surrounding Brexit, so it seemed only fair to get him in to reflect briefly on his time at the Chamber and offer a few thoughts on London Shipping Week. For those wanting a more in-depth interview with Bob, fear not, I am only here to serve. I had a much longer chat with Bob earlier in the week, and it is available on LISW in podcast form for free. Head to LISW for details. But for now, here's Bob.
I think this is my third or fourth London International Shipping Week. My first one was in 2015 when I was running the Port of Gibraltar, and I've certainly seen it grow dramatically, both in terms of scale and profile since 2015. And what that tells me is that the importance of London, of the UK as a maritime hub, continues to grow. We've had the twists and turns of Brexit. We've had the serious challenges of COVID-19, but nevertheless, London and the UK more widely continues to provide leadership across the international stage when it comes to shipping. And whether it's maritime services provided from London, be it law, be it insurance, be it finance, looking further afield at ship management from Glasgow and elsewhere, the training that we provide for seafarers and others working in the shipping industry. There's a really powerful mix there in the UK, which allows us, I think, to show leadership across on the world stage. And I think it's up to us to build on that and capitalize on that expertise, that experience when it comes to the biggest challenge that we now face, which is addressing climate change and decarbonisation in particular. But the short answer to your question is yes, LISW has been growing in size and stature. This year might be slightly different because of the restrictions still in place, all the concerns that people still have over the pandemic. But nonetheless, I would expect there to be a rich mix of senior, if not top, maritime professionals, both from the UK and virtually from around the world, to discuss the key issues of the day, engaging thought leadership, and come up with some of the solutions and ideas for the future.
And just briefly, I mean, this will be, I guess, positioned as the post-Brexit summit for UK shipping to some extent. Do you think there's enough clarity inside the UK industry of what post-Brexit UK shipping looks like and what it needs to be?
I think we're getting there. We're not there yet in terms of looking closer in. First of all, trading between the UK and the continent, that continues at pace. We've seen a slight readjustment or recalibration of some of the supply routes, but by and large, shipping continues to deliver to the extent that we've all got used to from the past. So, and I would see that we will now build on that. Perhaps there will be increased resilience because our supply lines are perhaps slightly more spread out than they might otherwise have been in the past. But that in itself is no bad thing when it comes to resilience for the country. Looking further afield, now that we are no longer in the EU, we've been doing some work with government recently on how to create a more favourable and attractive environment in the UK for shipping related business, and we expect some progress on areas such as tonnage tax and other business related aspects where we will continue to demonstrate that the UK is very much open for business, and the UK is very much or very, very well placed as a centre for maritime, for shipping related business. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard.
Finally, it wouldn't be London Shipping Week without a visit to the Norton Rose Fulbright balcony overlooking the Thames. So we caught up with the law firm's global co-head of shipping, Philip Roche, and got talking about why the social aspect of London Shipping Week is so essential.
We normally use London Shipping Week as a way of taking the temperature of the industry and checking what the big issues of the day are. This year, it seems more pertinent than usual because not only do we have a lot of issues to discuss, but after a year of only talking to people in the context of Zoom conversations, we are, of course, now going to be able to see them up close and personal and see quite how much weight they've put on over lockdown. We have with us for today's discussion Philip Roche, Global Co-Head of Shipping for Norton Rose Fulbright, which will be hosting a number of events today as part of London International Shipping Week. So welcome to the podcast, Philip.
Thank you, Richard.
How do you feel about London Shipping Week this year? Because it is slightly different, and I think it is going to be an interesting week. What's the sense you're getting from your clients and the general run up to the event? We're going to have a busy week, I think.
I think there will be a busy week. I think sadly there's going to be less overseas people here. I think a lot of people are planning to attend virtually, and a lot of events are going to be done as a joint real and virtual event. And I think that's fine. But I do think that there's going to be sufficient critical mass in London for it to feel like a usual London International Shipping Week. I know that a lot of people are looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to just seeing some faces and getting back to some normality. But it goes to your point that after 18 months of very little, suddenly be reintroduced to business socializing via London International Shipping Week is going to be a bit of a shock.
We're going to see if everybody can remember how to do canapé small talk.
Quite.
I'm sure we'll get back into the swing of it pretty swiftly.
I mean, we as a firm have only just restarted hospitality and events, so this is all a bit of a trial run for us. So it might well be that it goes terribly wrong at some stage.
Well, let's hope not. I mean, it's an important week, not just because of the timing, but also because obviously this is the first London Shipping Week post Brexit. It felt like the last time the industry gathered for this event, it was very much a question of Brexit was just there at the epicenter of everything. I'm hoping this year we get the opportunity to be a little bit more forward-looking, a bit more strategic. However you feel about what has happened over the last few years, I think the industry are at least all in agreement now that we need to look forward. Do you get the sense that we're now in the business of talking about strategy and direction with a bit more clarity than perhaps we have in recent years?
I think we are. I mean, I think Brexit is done. I mean, ironically, the real repercussions are now only starting to be felt with the shortage of lorry drivers and bare shelves in the supermarkets. But I think from shipping's point of view, that's a past debate, and there's so much to talk about changes that since the last shipping week in relation to the environment, technology. Decarbonisation. I think there's a huge amount to talk about, and I think that's the difference between this one and the last one. I read we were going to a lot of sessions about decarbonisation, but it was all very. We'll get round to this when we can. It's very hard for us. Whereas suddenly now it's okay. We've got to get on with it. Now is the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you look at the agenda for the week, it's dominated by discussions around decarbonisation, as you say, with much more of a pragmatic bent in terms of the topics that people are looking at. It's not just a question of the big theoretical sort of fuel choices down the road. I think most people are in the business now of talking about those difficult transitional decisions that they're making. You're going to be holding an event at Norton Rose later today about the ETS, the emissions trading scheme, which is one of those big practical questions. I think the industry is concerned about how it starts dealing with the trading of carbon. It's not something that is in its sort of wheelhouse. I think for the bigger companies, perhaps, there's an opportunity there, but for the vast majority of shipping, I suspect there's going to be a lot of people turning up to your event asking, what does this mean for me?
Right, and it's it's going to be important. I mean, carbon has been traded for a while, so there's some track record, so there's a lot of experience that can be brought to it. But I think the trick is going to be making it accessible for ship owners who are suddenly facing this cost, so that they need to understand what it's going to cost, how they're going to pay it, how they're going to recoup that from their customers. And they're going to need practical advice on how to deal with these issues. And it is, of course, slightly complicated by the fact that the UK, whilst there is an ETS, at the moment shipping won't be involved in that, as far as I understand it. So it's going to be very much a European thing to start with, and it's going to be a shock, I think, and people are going to need a lot of advice.
One of many opportunities as well, I suspect, for those attending your event. The other event, of course, you could have on is talking about IPOs, which is not a topic I thought we would be talking about. But actually, in the wake of Taylor Maritime and a handful of activity and interest in IPOs, that does seem to be back on the agenda, albeit in slightly nascent form. Do you think that London is going to be talking about stock exchange and shipping in the immediate future, or are we still a little bit early for that conversation, do you think?
I think it's a little bit early. It's not really my area, Richard, but as I understand it, there's high hopes, but I think how quickly those hopes come to fruition and the extent to which they do is somewhat murky. But I think that it's important at Shipping Week that we do have this discussion, that we put our cards on the table, show what London can do in that regard, and I think make sure that shipping knows that London is open for business in that respect.
Well, put some people in a room after 18 months of lockdown, give them some canapes and free wine, and I'm sure the optimism will flow freely.
We can but hope.
Yes. Anyway, for now, Philip Roche, Global Co-Head of Shipping at Norton Rose Fulbright, thank you for joining the London International Shipping Week podcast.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you. Bye.
And that's it for another day, I'm afraid. Thank you to the LISW team for letting me hijack the digital airways today. And thank you to all my guests for taking the time to talk. I do hope you all have an enjoyable, or at least insightful day milling around the various events this week. And don't forget, you can check out all our London Shipping Week coverage and much more at LISW.com. For now, thank you for listening and goodbye.